ARE Podcast, Season 1, Episode 7.
Welcome to the ARE Podcast. ARE Podcast, where it's all about encouraging and inspiring you today so you can fulfill your dream of becoming a licensed architect tomorrow. And now your host, David Doucette.
Hello. Welcome to another episode of the ARE Podcast, and we're joined today by our co-host, Eric Coy-Fried. How are you, Eric?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. And today, actually, we got a great show. We are going to talk about an architect buying a house. And you might be thinking, well, why are we talking about that? I'm 24 and I won't be buying a house for a long time. And in fact, David, I'm going to design my own house, so I don't need to know about buying a house. So we're going to talk about that too, because I think as architects, we all have dreams of designing our own house. But sometimes the true story is, we're a cobbler's kid with no shoes. So we're going to talk all about that. Eric, how should we begin? What I think is a really interesting topic, and I'll just preface it before I throw it to you, Eric. I bought a house in Las Vegas just over a year ago. First home that I would live in. I bought a few investment properties over the years, but it's different when it's your own home. And then Eric just completed purchase a couple weeks ago, so we both have insight in the process. So with that, Eric, I'll throw it over to you.
Well, I think the idea of an architect either buying a house or, of course, building their own fulfills the ultimate career dream, right? It's something that we all talk about in school. It's got deep precedence in history, right? Frank Lloyd Wright built not one but two houses for himself, Taliesin North and West, and it becomes the ultimate opportunity for you to showcase your talents, your genius, but also to apply what you've been doing for everybody else for yourself. So as you say, the cobbler's son with no shoes, this is our chance to actually start wearing shoes for a change.
So let's back up a second. I don't know if an architect actually dreams of buying a house. I think the architect dreams only of designing their own house. At least it was like that for me. And as you know, Eric, we both were practitioners in the residential world for years. And oftentimes we're designing homes for clients that, frankly, we can't afford to own.
Right. Well, maybe that shows my old age and realizing, oh yeah, I don't have 20% down to buy bare land and then another pile of money to build a new house from scratch. So maybe because I lived on the West Coast for 20 years. For me, the dream was I'm going to buy a house and do an addition to it.
Right. Well,
right, because that just from a pure realistic of what I could have possibly afford.
Let's talk economically speaking. This dream of wanting to design our own house. If that's the case, and if we want to be working architects, chances are we're living in a metropolitan area or a suburban area. The reason being, we need clients for our architecture practice. I know there are architects who are able to make it work in the rural environment, but for the most part, we're concentrated in metropolitan suburban areas. So with that, if that's where we're setting our practice up, whether we're working for someone else or not, we are in areas that are more expensive to just live in. And then if we add in the cost of land and then the cost of building a house, it's cost prohibitive for most people. And just as an FYI, every state's a little different. But if you're buying land, you need cash. You can't take a loan. Typically, you can't take a loan out on a piece of land. You need the cash. So then you need the cash to buy the land and then also to be able to finance a house. So there's a lot of roadblocks to us actually designing our dream house, and a lot of it's financially based.
And my old mentor in Santa Fe, and this is now over 20 some odd years ago, he I won't mention his name, so I guess it's a good story to tell. He designed a house for a couple, right? Husband and wife couple. He ended up falling in love with the client's wife. The client's wife divorced the husband, and my boss, the architect, moved into the house that he designed for them.
That's one way to do it.
That's the old Frank Lloyd Wright approach to
exactly
to finding your soulmate. And but it was a fascinating, from my perspective, it was fascinating for a number of reasons. I mean, first of all, it was a soap opera right in front of me. But Ed also, he had he said, I never designed a bathroom for myself. You know, I never lived with a bathroom that I designed. He said, I learned all of these things I was doing wrong about showers and laundry and kitchens, and because when he actually was forced to suffer through one of his own designs, he gave him great insight into a better way to do it. Because he was a guy, you know, he's a bachelor. He never cooked. He barely did laundry. You know, so it's just kind of that's always kind of stuck with me, that designing your own home or remodeling your own home is going to give you insight into the profession that you can't get just doing it for other people.
Exactly. And how long was he practicing before that happened? He was practicing architect, of course.
Yeah, 25 years.
Right.
But he had never gotten to live in one of his own creations before. And here was a $500 square foot gorgeous mansion type creation that just through circumstance he ended up living in.
Right. Which, by the way, I don't recommend. I don't encourage you to pursue that strategy. Not sleeping with your client's spouse. Yeah. Yeah.
Don't do it.
That's never a good idea. There's nothing can come good of that. All right. So that's really the roadblock into designing your own house. It's I mean, I had that dream for many years, and I did design build for 3 years. So I wanted to make that a reality, but you know, at the time I was living in Los Angeles, one of the most expensive areas in the country. And at some point you realize that it's just it's not feasible. But you know, who wants a $7,500 a month mortgage, even if you actually could afford it? I would rather have, you know, money to travel and do other things and all that. So let's put that one aside. This idea of designing your own home, which if you have the opportunity and the finances to do it, I think it's great. With that said, I would just encourage you to work with a residential architect for a couple of years before you even seriously consider that, because if you do a lot of work in commercial, residential is a whole nother skill set, and that's actually a whole nother podcast.
Well, yeah, but I don't know if you have somebody in mind, but I have 3 friends that are noted commercial architects. They do great commercial build. They design schools and courthouses, right? When it came to designing their own home, their words to me were, "Oh, this will be easy."
Really?
They'd never really designed a house before,
right.
But in their mind, in the hierarchy of project types, houses are at the bottom of the barrel. It's easy. And I just bit my tongue. And I'm like, uh-huh. And sure enough, fast forward a year later, where they're having to work with their spouse, right, and get agreement and build something they can afford and build something practical. The visions of the grandiose modern showcase that initially they intended becomes a Napa Valley farmhouse A-frame, you know, because practical matters of space and light and budget and materials and, you know, function start to creep in. And then they realize that they go through a whole, you know, secondary master's degree education in designing houses for humans.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And if you are, if you love the idea of designing your own house, I recommend that you do it as while you're a bachelor or a bachelorette, because as you just mentioned, Eric, you know, once you include somebody else, especially like a significant other or a spouse, it changes, and you have to compromise. And I think we've talked about that before, working with residential clients, and that's a skill. And sometimes you're a therapist, but the idea of compromise And we've talked about this where if both couples are just compromising about everything in the house, then you have literally a house that is full of compromises, and it doesn't do anything exciting in any of the rooms. And where we talked about is in those situations, the husband gets this room, the wife gets this room, so they kind of really get what they want, and the house has some personality.
My wife, who has no design background whatsoever, she majored in psychology, has somehow decided that she is a better designer than me.
Yeah, I see that.
and so she keeps making these announcements of what she's going to do to this room and the landscape and this and that. And I'm like, no. We have to discuss everything before you choose a paint color.
Little dogs in the background. Those are Eric's, not mine.
Those are, yeah. Before you choose a paint color, before you choose anything. And it's almost the opposite of what you'd expect, which is, the architect's spouse saying, I'm making all the decisions and you're not. I'm not doing that here. I'd like to, but I'm not doing that here because she's doing it. And so we're not even seeking compromise. I'm just trying to hold her back from painting the walls purple.
I was going to say, you're going to come home from one of your, speaking gigs on the other side of the country, and the living room is going to be painted some color, and it's going to have all new furniture, and she's going to be, look, honey, what I did.
She wants to paint one wall black and another wall with a black on black damask. Do you know what that is? It's like a weird floral pattern in this wallpaper she found. And, I was like, when did you become a goth girl? Like, why are we painting the walls black?
So, okay, so let's talk about the more realistic idea of an architect buying a house, which is no less stressful. It's no less creative because it's really a couple-step process. The first step, actually begins before you even get ready to buy a house. You have to have all your finances in order. You have to have your credit score up where it needs to be. You have to have money in the bank for the down payment. You have to have very little credit card debt. So there's a lot of work to be done before you even get to like, hey, I want to go buy a house.
Oh, and you need to make sure you'll have the free time to drop everything and run over to look at a house that your agent found for you that's perfect.
And not to mention have free time to deal with your mortgage broker that is just sucks. And we both had very similar experiences with mortgage brokers. And we'll talk more about that, I guess, in a little bit. So I'm listening to this podcast. I'm 25. I'm engaged, and we're thinking about buying a house. What would be where would I start?
Well, the first step is to accept the fact that you have a distinct advantage. You have the gift of sight. You're like the three-eyed raven in Game of Thrones. Like, you can look at any old building and see past the ugly wallpaper and the Home Depot ceiling fans and most people cannot. And if 25 years of residential design has taught me anything, it's that normal people, basically everybody else, can't see past what's right in front of them. And so they can't see a house for good bones or not, which means that you have an advantage. You can buy the weirdo house as long as you can see the good bones in it. And knowing that you could steam off that wallpaper, you could paint over that weird, peacock egg blue wall that they did and the bright canary yellow kit, like you can see past all that and really make it a showcase. And just that advantage means that you could buy houses that aren't going to go over asking. In the building, in the world of Zillow and Redfin and what's the other one, right? Where you have the apps, Trulia, and you have the apps on your phone and you're looking at stuff and your friends and your cousin and your mother-in-law are sending you stuff all the time. They're going to send you stuff that's all finished, where they already put in the granite countertops and the Hans Grohe faucet and all that other stuff, but you're going to pay a premium for that. So we set out when we started looking for houses, I said to my agent, show us the ugly ducklings, because cosmetically I I don't want to be stuck with their choices anyway. So having that ability to have the vision, that great sight, is your biggest advantage as an architect.
And I think you have to you have to be realistic. You have to set your goals of what you can realistically afford. And the first step in the process is to talk to a banker, mortgage broker, somebody who's basically going to lend you money and get pre-approved. And they'll look at your finances and they'll let you know how much you can spend based on that. But assuming we have our expectations aside, and by the way, if you haven't done this yet, just go to an open house in your neighborhood. You don't have to be in the market to buy. Just go to an open house. Most places have them on Sundays. Just go start looking around. And actually, it's a good training just as an architect, especially if you're into the residential world. You can see what you like, what you don't like, how people design things. And oftentimes, depending on your area, some of these nicer homes have open houses, and they're fun to go in and look. But don't be so concerned about what people think. And I know this is hard when we're in our 20s, and it's hard when we're in our 40s, like Eric and I. But, nobody wants to buy. I mean, right, part of us want to buy the worst house on the block because we know we can fix it up. But it's not like we want to say to our friends, hey, look at this dump we just bought. You guys come over. And they're not going to have the vision, as Eric just talked about. They're not going to see it. They're just going to see what's in front of them and see that we got a piece of crap. So there's a little bit of, I don't know if humility is the right word, ego, whatever it is, but a little bit of, not worrying about what people think.
Well, humility and architect have never appeared in the same sentence, so that might be part of the problem. I have a Three Little Pigs story. Or is it Three Little Bears? No, it's a Three Little Bears story.
No, Three Little Pigs, and then is it the Three Bears? They're not little.
Oh yeah, I have a three. Well, whatever. I got a story. Can I tell it? Can I tell a story? We found house number 1. Nobody wanted it. It had been on the market for 60 days, which is an eternity on the West Coast. Nobody knew why nobody wanted it. It was a big house, and it was $100,000 more than we are approved for. But my agent said, let's look at it anyway. It's been on the market. Maybe we can offer them a lower price. It turned out it was a house with 0 bedrooms, according to the MLS listing. Because when you went in, it was a series of 50-foot wide floors that essentially were triple split level. So you'd walk into one floor and it would step down to another and then step up to. It was a wild, but any normal person going in would only see the green shag carpeting on the open riser stairs, the weird hippie murals that they painted in the bedroom, and on the MLS listing, the fact that it had 0 bedrooms. I went in, my wife and I went in with the agent, and I immediately said, we can make this a 3-bedroom house. It had plenty of square footage. And the agent said, well, how would you do that? And I said, I would put a wall here and a wall here. And he said, how did you do that so quickly? So, are you kidding? The wall here and a wall here. There's 3 bedrooms. Done. And here's where the doors would go. And so we put an offer in. The offer was $100,000 less than they were asking, but because it had been on the market for so long, they accepted it. We were so excited until they revealed to us or disclosed to us none of these additions had been permitted. None of these remodels had been permitted. The guy was a builder. He built this house in 1974, and he had tinkered for it for 40 years. And so we ended up backing out of the deal. But the ability to see past the green shag carpeting and the hippie murals on the wall would have given us this. I still think about this house because it would have been so incredible if it would have been, if it would have been possible to get it insured. but it was I just drove by it the other day, like looking at it longingly still. So that's story number 1, the house that was too big. Story number 2 is the house that was too small. It was only 1,200 square feet and poorly laid out. It had, the second floor was under the attic. So I'd gone there, I measured it, and I designed very quickly, we're going to pop up one side of the attic to create a dormer. The dormer is going to go to the full length. We're going to pop in another bathroom that stacks over the other bathroom. I laid out essentially 5 phases of additions and remodels that we would do over time. We put an offer in. It was accepted. It was in our price range. And right at the last minute, we backed out because my wife said, well, when will we get to the house that you envision? And I said, oh, probably 6 years, because we can't afford to do the remodels all at once. So, I was so excited about the idea of having projects and a multi-phase remodel that I realized, oh yeah, we have to live in this thing while we're going through it, and that's not going to be very fun, especially with a kid.
Well, and that's a good point before you get to your next house. That's very common, I think, because the market is so high all over the country for the most part. The bubble's coming, but the bursting of the bubble is coming. We don't know when, and we don't know to what extent. But a lot of people get into a house. They use everything they have to get into the house. They're scraping to get the down payment. They're scraping to get their credit cards paid off in time, whatever it is. And oftentimes there isn't anything left over to fix the house up, which makes more of the situation which we're talking about. Buying a house that you need a vision for, can make it difficult, on move-in day when you sort of realize now what you're up against. It's like, oh yeah, I got to live in this place. It's not what anybody wants, but this is I got to put my time in here.
Exactly. And so we ended up kind of stepping back from it. I think we were so excited about the fact that the site had the potential to be incredible that we lost sight of the fact that it's not yet incredible. It was a tiny little cottage that that needed a lot of work. And then the third house was the Porridge house, right? Just right. And that's the one we ended up buying. Essentially, we found it by chance because we typed in the word modern into Redfin or Zillow or whatever we were using. And it was one of 3 houses in the entire Portland region that had the word modern in it that was in our price range. And so it's an unusual house. It's the one modern house on the whole block, if not the whole neighborhood. They had done a series of remodels, but they also had bad taste in colors. And so the bones were great, but I knew that, okay, I could rip out the faucets, I could change the paint colors, I could do that in the first month, and I could do it cheaply, and I could do it all myself, and we could really have something. And so that's what we did.
And this was just a couple weeks ago.
This was, we haven't even been here a month yet.
And Eric did he took out a load-bearing wall as he he posted on Facebook.
So first of all, it's not a load-bearing wall, smartass. I combined two small bedrooms. I took out the wall in between and made one big bedroom for our daughter. And I put it on Facebook, and David and then my idiot contractor friends started saying, dude, that's a load-bearing wall. Your house is going to fall down. It's not. I went up in the attic. I checked. There's nothing bearing on it at all. It's totally out. You know what the interesting part about taking out that wall was? My wife and I did the demo ourselves. We threw the debris out the window into the yard, and then the only thing I couldn't do was I'd cut the electrical wires going to the outlets, and I didn't know how to put them back together again.
So, but why were we saying that? Why were we saying that it's a double? I mean, it's a load-bearing wall. Oh,
because in the photo that I showed, it showed a double top plate, and normally a load-bearing wall has a double top plate. It turns out that wall had been added, and so they did not only a double top plate, but a double sill plate and double side wall plates, like, jam. I don't know what you'd call them. So they kind of framed in there's a lot of weird things in this house like that. But no, I took the wall out. The house didn't collapse, and nothing's bearing on it anyway. And then we had an electrician fixing the wires that I'd cut, and so he was crawling around the attic. And I thought, okay, if he falls through, then David was right, and it was a load-bearing wall.
which, by the way, one of the most exciting things about an architect owning a house, opposed to designing it, right, and having somebody build it for them, is they get to get their hands dirty. We get to get our hands dirty. You're doing it in your house. I've been doing it in mine for a year. I learned how to do electrical. Thank God for YouTube. But, my house is only 4 years old. I added a bunch of 20-something recessed downlights. It would have cost me a few grand to have an electrician do it. And because it was a new house, essentially, all the wiring, everything was up to code, nothing was funky. So it was easy for me to just sort of, tap into that. I wasn't, dealing with bare wires and, some of the wiring that we, have in old houses. I also did a sound system and ceiling speakers and wall speakers. And, I did that all myself, which is why it's a year later and it's still not done, opposed if I just paid somebody to do it.
Yeah, that's why you spent the weekend on your hands and knees ripping up old carpet.
That only took a couple hours, actually, which, by the way, it's one of those things. It's like, well, what's the best way to rip up old carpet? YouTube, or you get on the internet, you just cut it every 3 feet and just roll it up, and there you go. So it's that stuff. That's the fun part, for sure.
So what was interesting were you obviously most of your money goes into buying the house. So then the answer becomes, how do you prioritize what you're going to do next? So putting in, buying a bunch of $50 faucets and installing them yourself, that becomes easy. Buying a can of paint and painting it, doing a family painting party and painting it yourself is easy. But now my wife and daughter are asking for things that's like, whoa, we can't do that yet. We got to save up for that.
Well, I'll give you an example of why it's sometimes a problem when we as architects buy a house. Mine is 4 years old. It's in this LEED platinum community in Las Vegas in an area called Summerlin, which is a very desirable area. They build these houses on top of each other. But it's a very well-built house. It's got solar panels on the roof. It's got a tankless hot water heater. My electrical bill is like $12 a month, and that's only because I have some basic fee. So it's well built, but the way they build these production homes is in the Vegas area. The finish on the drywall is what they call a skip trowel finish. It's like they spray the last coat of spackle on, and they kind of just go over it with a knife, and it's a rough finish. It's not an orangey peely finish. It doesn't look dated. It's just a rough finish. But they do them in all the Vegas homes. The house is 4 years old. So as my girlfriend and anyone who came over and saw it beforehand, they're like, this is fine. You don't need to do anything with it. But for me, that wasn't good enough. I wanted smooth walls. I want smooth white walls. And there's a 2-story loft space in there. So a lot of nice natural light. I just wasn't going to be happy with this skip trowel. So I hired a drywall guy and, hired.
Well, didn't you hire a few drywall guys?
Yeah, I'm on my second drywall guy now who's there hopefully as we speak. But earlier in the year, I had one drywall guy and he actually did good work, but he ended up, not completing the job. And basically they have to skim coat over everything. And it's actually a lot of work because they got to get the new mud to stick to the old mud. And it's just a lot of sanding. With that said, it's probably going to be $12,000 later in drywall, this mudding stuff. But it'll be worth it because it's what I wanted.
I think it's great that we finally know how much your OCD is costing you.
Yeah, exactly.
It's $12,000
to basically a new house. And the woman who had it before, she was a designer. She didn't really live in it. The carpet was looked brand new. Of course, I had to rip up because there's drywall mud on that. So that's another, few grand to replace that. I'm going to do hardwood floors anyway. But it was a perfectly fine house. 98% of the population would have been fine to move in and use it as is. This is a beautiful house. It's 4 years old, but not good enough for me.
It's funny the things that that we prioritize to change. I demoed that wall on the first day we moved in because it bothered me so much, right? And I ripped out the faucets I think on the second or third day because they were crappy, $15 Home Depot cheapy faucets that they had been living with, and I'm like, I'm not going to brush my teeth with that.
Well, I think what's interesting too is we have these grandiose ideas. As does everybody. It's not just unique to architects. We've been dealing with residential clients for a long time. They all have these grandiose ideas until you start talking about budget and how much money this is going to cost, So we're no different in that respect. But, we have all these ideas, and then we get a little dose of reality and we start to figure out, okay, it's going to cost this, it's going to cost that. And then we do, okay, well, what can we do now, or what can we afford now?
Well, it's funny how I started thinking back of how many $700 faucets that I've specified for clients.
Right.
Yeah, just get the Kohler Moderna. It's $675. I think it's on sale, and just didn't think about it. And then when my own faucet, I'm like, or the $1,200 Philippe Stark organic one that I'm still in love with. And my wife said, "Can't you just print out a picture and put it by the sink? Wouldn't that be enough?" So, I'm essentially bargain hunting now and calling manufacturers saying, "Can you do you give architect discounts in order to try to get the things that I want?" But I'm not, on principle, I'm not going to spend $700 on a faucet.
It's funny, you're doing all the things we hate about clients, right?
Yes, exactly.
That's exactly it. You're like, we would be the worst client for an architect.
I remember being in San Francisco for so long, I had a lot of techie clients, and anytime I would say, "Yeah, the faucet's $700," they would say, "That's 2 iPads." Like, that's how they.
Right.
I'm not going to spend 2 iPads on a faucet.
So what is it for you if you now see a $700 faucet? What's the equation in your mind?
Oh, well, to me, it's like a mortgage payment. It's like, well, that's a third of a mortgage payment or half a mortgage payment. So
exactly.
But the faucets we ended up getting were Price Pfister ones with brushed nickel. But I'd gotten a discount and got them cheap, and they were under $100. So that was fine.
Were they used?
No, they were new.
It's just funny and interesting how when it is our own, we just look at it different, and a lot of us don't get that opportunity, until we buy that house.
Well, I replaced the towel bars in the bathroom. And, my wife said, "But there are already towel bars in the bathroom." I said, No, these are the wrong ones. She said, what are you talking about? "Well, these are white PVC. They're awful. We're going to rip those out. We're going to put in brushed nickel to match the new faucet that we just put in." And I did this one with these organic ends that Kohler makes. And and I'm so happy with them. And I just rub the end of the towel bar because it gives me joy.
Did Lori come around to the towel bar, or she's still like, "I don't know why you did that"?
She's still, I don't see it. She's like, "The towel covers up most of the bar. You don't even see the bar."
But it's funny, those little victories for us, right? It's just that little stuff. All right, so we're taught that. I guess we just talked about the sort of joys, right, of owning a home. Let's talk a little bit about the process of actually getting there. What advice, or what's that about? So.
You and I both kind of follow the same process, and we both have the same issues, right? So we did our homework. I had talked to mortgage brokers in advance before we started looking. I wanted to know how much I could get approved for. We had saved up.
And what's a mortgage broker do?
A mortgage broker is basically the person that helps solicit a lender for you. They're a glorified middleman, is really what they are. And the good ones will bust their hump to essentially get you approved for as much as you can afford. The bad ones don't really do anything, and that's what I ended up with at first till I got rid of them. And
that's what I ended up with too. And I was in Vegas, Nevada, right? And Eric was in Portland, Oregon. These are all state stuff. And for those who don't know, mortgage brokers, you can go right to a bank. You can go to Citibank, you can go to Chase Bank. They all have their home lending departments, which may work for you, may work for a lot of people. If you have good income, steady flow, if you're W-2, if your loan application is kind of plain vanilla, you may get your best rate there. The problem that both Eric and I had is being sort of entrepreneurs and sole proprietors, and we don't have W-2s. So with the lending being much more strict these days, if you don't fit their very narrow prototype of what they're going to lend on, i.e. last 2 years of W-2s for starters, which we didn't have at the time. It makes it very difficult. So that's why we go to mortgage brokers, because they're in touch with a lot of different lenders. And the mortgage brokers will promise they can get a loan through, and then when it comes to the last hour of closing, you find out you can't, because they don't have any control. As Eric said, they're the middleman. There's the middleman, and then there's the lender, the person essentially who's actually lending you the money, and they're taking a last look at your file.
In the end, I ended up firing this guy who had dragged us on for 2 months, saying, "Yeah, 100% I can get you a loan, 100% I can get you a loan," and then he didn't get us a loan, and so we got rid of him, and I ended up going with Wells Fargo, which is my bank, just through their normal home mortgage department, and they just got it done. And so, sometimes that's the easiest way. I will say this: if you have 2 years of tax returns showing you were paid as an employee for a firm, W-2 essentially, and you saved up 10% of whatever a house costs or a little more, you should start looking for houses, essentially, because in many places, buying a house will be cheaper than paying rent. That's the case here in Portland, right, where our mortgage payment is less than what we were paying in rent. That's not the case in San Francisco, but a normal place, it would be.
And, interest rates are starting to go back up. When I bought a year and a month or two ago, I actually took a 15-year loan. We can basically take a 15-year or a 30-year loan. And a 30-year loan will give you a cheaper mortgage payment, a less mortgage payment. But if you look at the life of that loan over 30 years, you're going to pay a whole lot more in interest. I took a 15-year, but to get that 15-year, I had to put 20% down, because the bank wants, or the people who are lending you the money want to make sure you're solid. Because a 15-year mortgage, you're paying more each month. But in exchange for that, I get a lower interest rate. My interest rate is 2.85%, which I don't even think you can get anywhere now, which is an incredible interest rate. So it's either the 15-year or the 30-year mortgage. I will advise, though, if you're in the market or you're thinking about being in the market, don't overextend your house. Don't overextend yourself. I mean, back when we had the crash in 2006, basically what happened is people were borrowing money who shouldn't have been able to borrow the money in the process, and that was this whole subprime loan thing that happened. They weren't able to pay it back, and they got into bigger homes than they should have. They couldn't pay it back. That's why we had all these foreclosures and stuff. So it seems to be probably 10% down is, I think, a minimum. I'm sure there's a few places that will, they'll get you in no money down. Just stay away from that. From my own advice, if you don't have enough money for down payment, you're not ready to buy a house.
Well, it's not just the down payment, but then there's this $10,000 or whatever in closing costs that they try to explain to you what it goes to, but I still don't know. Yeah, exactly.
And you don't want to be so strapped that you can't change towel bars, in your bathroom. It's no fun at that point. Just save up some more money. Yeah.
By the way, the towel bar was $23 on Amazon.
It was.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great deal.
All right, so that the process is very stressful, and as we mentioned earlier in the show, having the time to deal with all these extra requirements and paperwork, it's really stressful for both you, the buyer, and the seller is equally stressed on the other end, because they have to have this closed, because they have a loan they have to pay off, so they have to meet sort of the closing date as well. So it's a very stressful relationship, a very stressful process. Although for you, Eric, when you went with your second banker, your Wells Fargo, that was a smooth transaction.
It was. The first guy had gotten me so stressed that I had to go to the ER because I developed bronchitis from the stress. This was the most stressful thing I'd ever gone through, and unnecessarily so. But you have to remember that for 2 months, he kept saying, okay, we're going to get it done, and I'll get you the keys tomorrow. So every day we were all packed up and thinking that we're going to get the keys the very next day. And that stretched on for 2 months of and all the while we couldn't switch mortgage brokers because it would have meant we would have had to get the house reappraised. We would have had to wait for a whole new. It would have delayed it by 3 weeks. So in the end, the Wells Fargo people came in. They got under some appraisal in 3 days instead of 3 weeks, and just made it all happen. And it was amazing. And all my stress just melted away. And I sent her a giant gift basket to thank her, and because she was so awesome.
And again, I think both the difficulty Eric and I had was essentially self-employed. That was the root of it. I think a lot of these mortgage brokers, if you're not plain vanilla, they don't want to spend the time on you. And my guy, he dragged mine on, and he was great, very responsive at first. And then, normally you're closing, you have 30 to 45 days to close. So the seller is expecting, and you pick the closing date, early on, and the seller is expecting to close then. And mine got delayed by a few weeks, and I couldn't get a new closing date from my mortgage broker. I'm like, okay, when are we closed? I got to tell the owner something. He just would not respond to email. I mean, just flat out not respond. And I was like emailing, calling him every day. And yeah, as like you, Eric, it's incredibly stressful.
Yeah, it became another job. It almost felt like a really bad project that had gone off the rails, and you're trying to salvage it. That's really what it felt like, of me calling, hounding, texting, emailing, and getting rid of him was such a relief.
It was another project, actually. That's exactly what it was, and the mental capacity, it's mentally exhausting. And unless you're in it, unless it's your own home, we're trained to not get so emotional, I guess. When we're doing this for clients, the designing their houses, visiting the construction sites, there's a part of us that is emotionally, I think, turned off. It's just part of what we do. But when it's our own, it's like, oh my God, all the emotions are alive, and like we're, hypersensitive at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I've got dozens of stories of, doing remodels or additions where I say, we're going to blow out this wall. And they're like, but my children's height is marked on that wall.
Right.
Like, well, take a picture of it because it's going away. Like, I'm very dispassionate about it. That wall's in the way of what you want. And if you want the view of the whatever, we got to get rid of that wall.
We did this one project. We had a second story, but we basically demoed most of the first story and left a couple of walls. And the contractor had a little cat there, digging everything up. And the owner came over, and he with his wife. He's almost like in tears, totally freaked out. And I'm just there, shooting the crap with the contractor. It's just another job. Totally freaked out, like, oh my God, how's it going to get all back together? And he stayed away for a couple of weeks, kind of until it was all cleaned up, and at least it was sort of clean and not all the crap around. But it affected him.
I tell them, I say, don't come during demolition, especially at the end of demolition, because in San Francisco, a typical scenario would be we spent $900,000 on a house and then gutted it.
Right.
And then they're like, "Oh my God, this is my $900,000 house. What have I done?" And I say, "Don't worry, we're going to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. It'll be fine."
Right. And then like when now it's like our house, like, oh my God, right? Yeah. So that's the process of buying in a nutshell in terms of finding the lender. Again, there's a lot of work on your end before you even approach a lender. If you wanted advice, you go find a lender to get some advice, but they're going to tell you what we're telling you basically. You got to have money in the bank. You got to have a decent credit score. I don't know what's considered decent, probably something above 680 these days. Back in the day, the subprime mortgage, the early 2000s, they were lending money to everybody, people below 680. That was when the second mortgage would step in. Oh, we should explain this. when you're buying a house, the what they call the first loan is typically they're going to lend on 80%. So they need somebody else to pick up that second, what they call the second. By the way, do you put 10% down, right?
I put 10% down.
Who was the second? Do you know? Or did they do the whole thing?
They did the whole thing.
They did do the whole thing.
Yeah, and then there's a whole education that I went through also, because the first mortgage broker, the one who screwed up, he kept saying, "Can't you just give me 20%?" And it's like, if I could give you 20%, I wouldn't need you, moron. Like I don't have another pile of cash hidden that I'm keeping secret from you. The Wells Fargo people, the nice thing about going with a big bank is that Wells Fargo keeps their loans. They don't sell them. Okay. And so what I had realized is part of the problem that this guy had was he was essentially building this loan to flip it. They buy these, they essentially write these mortgages up and they immediately sell them to the highest bidder. And so they don't care about you. They don't care about any longevity to it. Wells Fargo is keeping the loan. They're going to be my lender. It's not going anywhere. So their requirements were much less. And so they funded 90% of the house, and I funded 10%.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in most cases, they are selling the loan on the secondary market. Any major lender, unless they're keeping them like a Wells Fargo, they're going to finance up to 80%. So then somebody else needs to come in and finance that 20% or the difference between what you put down and to make it up that 20%. One other thing to keep in mind, by the way, if you have 20% down, most people will talk to you right away. That like you're in good shape if you have 20%.
Oh, they'll bring out wine if you walk in their office with 20%. I really felt like a second-class citizen by saying I only had 10%. And to me, that was a lot of work to save up that 10%.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
Made me feel like I was a hobo for only having 10.
It's like, oh, you're one of those guys, because they know. Right. Because if your loan is not at 20%, you then have to get private mortgage insurance, which is exactly what it sounds. It's something that you pay extra for because you are at a higher risk, simply because the loan, you're not putting in 20%. You basically have to make up that 20%. So, for example, by me putting 20% down, I didn't have to pay private mortgage insurance, which saves, I don't know how much it is a month, because is it $60 a month, $100 a month? Oh, it's higher? Is it $200 a month? Private mortgage insurance?
Yeah.
You're not more than how much?
It's $300 something a month.
Wow.
For PMI. And so the soonest, my goal in life now is to pay off that additional 10% as quickly as possible, so I can get rid of that $300 a month. So
that private mortgage insurance that Eric is paying over $300 a month for, that literally is money peed out the window. That goes to nothing. That doesn't go to your principal. That doesn't go to your interest. That goes to nothing. But once, as Eric just mentioned, once he gets his loan paid off to that there's only 80% left on the loan, then that private mortgage insurance will go away, and that's literally an extra $300 and something in his pocket.
Yeah, and then what's interesting is certain states have different requirements about when that mortgage insurance drops. In the state of Oregon, where I am, there's a state law that says they have to automatically stop it for you. In other states, you have to request it, so you have to pay attention essentially, and then the moment you hit 20%. Has been paid, or you have 20% in equity, you then have to manually write a letter and request it, which is a little kind of evil.
That is kind of evil. And by the way, all of this loan stuff it's a state by state basis. There's loan brokers that can only manage loans in Nevada or Oregon, and so it's all state by state basis. As far as I know, though, this 80%, that's an industry standard. That seems to be just across the board. If somebody's lending more than 80%, then you have to have private mortgage insurance.
Yeah, absolutely. There's, is there any more to cover on the financial aspect?
I don't think so. I think we covered that. What else do you have?
Well, because you've been in it for a year. I've been in mine for a month. there were some observations that I've noticed that I just wanted to mention that I thought were interesting.
Go ahead.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, and this is kind of funny, is I'm very willing to use commercial products in a residential setting. So I use a lot of 3form in my projects anyway, which is this cool polycarbonate, but it's a pretty commercial product. So I have the 3form guys building me this like cool partition wall thing for right over there. So the use of commercial products in a residential setting is something that I imagine I've seen a lot of architects do on their own home.
Right.
And I imagine you would do the same. Second is every manufacturer I talk to now, I ask them for a discount.
You do?
Oh yeah. I immediately emailed my friends at Lutron. I'm like, give me every switch you can for free, or give me a discount. What do you got? My friends at Whirlpool for a washer dryer. And believe it or not, most of them will at the very least give you a discount.
Right.
And then if you're, you say you're building your own house and it's going to be a showcase, you might even be able to get some free stuff on top of it. So that's observation number 2. And then observation number 3 is, you and I this is certainly true, but a lot of my other friends who bought their own house and are remodeling it, they've built in a live workspace for themselves.
Yep.
And that seems to be prevalent as well. So I imagine those of you listening, you'll probably end up looking for a place to create a work area for yourself. And mine, it's still unfinished, so I won't show you, but mine's got great light all around, and all I see is trees, which I love.
And I think that's one of the things as we get into that home buying experience. I think that is, one of those dreams and fantasies, but a reality of an architect working from home. And so that space is important. And that was one of my main things when I was looking in Vegas, which, by the way, there's so much inventory in Vegas, meaning there's a lot of homes available today. And there's so many housing developments that are going up. There's frame construction everywhere, and the rate that they build these things, it's unbelievable. It's just like I'll go to Vegas next week, and there'll be 3 more homes, all rough framed, first, second floor, in the development next over. It's crazy. The efficiency, but these are the big home builders. These are the Pulte's and the Toll Brothers. They're production homes, which, by the way, based on at least my house, it's built very well. I was very impressed because I've been climbing in the attic and stuff.
I think your house is the exception, not the rule.
I wonder. It's like the whole community is like this LEED green, community, and it was on some news, 4 years ago or whatever. When it first came out. I don't know. I haven't seen enough homes, but I know when I toured Vegas, I wanted to be in Summerlin because it's near Red Rock. And a lot of the homes just seemed blah to me, and not a lot of natural light. And that's when I walked into this home, I was like, this is the one. I like this one. It was double height space, a lot of natural light. There's a loft area, which is where the studio will be, where at some point I'll record a podcast from. I planned on doing that last year, but it hasn't happened yet. But that's the stuff we as architects think about. And not that normal people don't think about that stuff. I mean, I think they're looking for natural light, whether they realize it or not. I think we're just more aware of it.
And then the final observation, and the natural light's a good segue to it, is that architects would be more apt to try alternative spatial arrangements and layouts. So removing a door, which normally people would think, no, you need that door, or removing a handrail, right? So ours is a split level house, so we have 5 steps going up and 7 steps going up, 5 steps going down. I really want to take off one of those handrails. Now, all, of course, logic and reason, like, no, that's against code and it's dangerous, but it would look so much better to just take off one side of those handrails. So we'll probably do that.
Have you run into it yet? Again, another interesting point when we're talking about our own house is how much time we will spend on thinking about something like analysis paralysis before we'll actually do it. Whereas with a client, we don't give it nearly that much thought. But now it's like ours, it's in front of us. We know how we're going to use it. We know how we might want to use it. Like just a simple like furniture arrangement in a room, for example. Like it'll be weeks to toss that around in our heads.
Well, with the furniture arrangement, we're just moving. We're just trying it. You know, my wife and I are like, let's just pick it up and try it this way. Let's try it this way. We're having the paralysis on paint color, where we can't, because that's a commitment. You know, when I saw those 2 bedrooms, I knew taking it down the wall was it, and I didn't hesitate and took it down the first day. But the paint color in the room, we spent a lot of time arguing about.
And did you figure it out yet?
Oh yeah, it's she went with it's my daughter's room, so she went with a whole Hawaiian Moana theme. So it's like she's got like this seafoam green carpet with blue walls, and then this mural of Hawaii on one end, and it's all done already. It's really cute.
Nice. Well, I was gonna say I don't have anyone to consult on the painting, which never was a discussion. It's just everything's gonna be white, so that's an easy one.
Well, there's the old expression that architects are colorblind, right? And so they paint all their houses white. But no, I love color, so every room's gonna be a different color.
It's funny. I love color. If I was actually gonna have some colored walls in the house, I think that would be tormenting in terms of trying to figure out, do I want that color? Paint samples and think I made a mistake, and because the woman was a designer who I bought the house from, so she did have some accent colors. They were actually nice, but they're painted over.
Right.
Because of that, skip trowel stuff I had to get rid of. What else about home ownership? I think we've covered the bads. I think we've covered the goods. I think we've covered the realities of it's more likely that we'll actually buy a house than we design our own house.
Yeah, but I do have an addition that I've already designed in my head that's going to go right back there that I'm very excited about. And as soon as we build up a little more equity, I'm gonna talk to the lenders about borrowing for that.
Well, you got to get rid of that $300 a month PMI.
PMI, exactly. The last thing to mention that kind of caught me a little bit by surprise is landscape. So my house is on a nice piece of property, and they really did a beautiful job landscaping it. And so we're talking about the outside landscape and like as if they're rooms, and designing. We want to create a new room essentially in one corner that is just covered with shrubs. So we want to kind of open up some of that and surgically build a little seating area for this and a little fire pit for that. So the landscape is kind of additional rooms in the house that I didn't really anticipate.
Maybe you could get yourself on HGTV if they're even doing those shows anymore.
Oh yeah, they're doing a lot of those things. But then you have to deal with bland decisions. I don't know. Well,
stuff I used to hear from friends. I had a designer who actually had a designer friend who had a show on there. And basically the gist I got from him is a lot of that stuff falls apart after a while. Because they just, they kind of put it up quick for the TV show. It's a TV show production, right? They're building sets, not necessarily building something that's going to add to life of the home. But
so I've done a few episodes of HGTV stuff, and there was no time to really decide anything. It was more like, what can we build quickly, and then the crew will come in and descend on it for 2 weeks, and then it's done. So for my own house, I don't know if I'm willing to do that. I'd rather kind of take my time with it.
Oh yeah, no way. I mean, just the thought process that I think that we have when it's our own house, it's got to turn in our head a lot. At least it does in mine. I mean, it's been a year. I'm still working on my house.
Exactly.
I put in this amazing sound system, a couple Sonos speakers, some clip speakers, and I don't know, 18 speakers, something like that. And I got a speaker in the shower, which that was my dream, to have a speaker in the shower. I put a speaker in the shower. But it took a long time turning in my head of, okay, how do I want to do it? Where do I want to do it? Are they ceiling mounted? Are they mounted in the corner? All that stuff. Just turn it in your head. So I imagine that's what your head's filled with. But you also have now your wife to consider. I could have my own sort of internal dialogue. You actually have to go back. You got to compromise some things and go back and forth.
Yeah, you know, just like we bought houses at the same time and kind of had kids at the same time, I'm realizing now we should have gotten divorced at the same time, because it would have made my life a lot easier.
Right? That's true. So, well, there's still time. You know, you're young, so
let's see how the month goes.
All right, I think that's gonna wrap up this podcast. This has been a great one. Hopefully, helpful for you and some things to think about.
I know. I feel better.
I feel bad. Well, you know what? I meant to mention this and I forgot. Of course, typical, right? We're in a show wrap up and we're going to keep gabbing. But I still do have a dream of designing a cabin in the woods somewhere. You know, so I'm still holding on to that. That may or may not be a reality, but it's not like, you know, it's years ago I gave up on the idea that I'm going to design my own house. It's just not financially, it's not where I want to put myself. So that was it. Is there any little cabin, anything you want to design?
Oh, yeah. So Oregon has an incredible coastline that's an hour and a half, 2 hours from Portland. And so I'm thinking a little beach house that I share with a bunch of friends. That way we could all kind of pool our money, and I'll design it. But that's my next dream.
All right. So now we're going to wrap this up for sure. We're at an hour. On behalf of Eric Corey Fried, my name is David Doucette, and this has been the ARE Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the ARE Podcast. Be sure to visit architectexamprep.com and check out our other podcast episodes, video tips, and the ARE blog.